Thank you very much for being here. Tough to be scheduled at the same time as the presentation.
Totally.
You see, my slides are available right there. So I'm a senior web application developer at the School of Public Health. You have my email, and this is my Twitter/GitHub/Slack handle. I'm on the WPCampus Slack group, so feel free to contact me if you have any questions about the presentation. All right, why are we here today talking about code quality? Why code quality really matters? Before we talk about it, I would like to start with two little stories, two little analogies. The first one that I like to use is the airline industry. And the airline industry is really interesting because when you think about it, people in the airline industry build those incredibly complex machines from scratch. And they get it on the tarmac, they fly for thousands and thousands of hours, and they have very, very, very little room for mistakes. Right? How many times do you hear of a plane getting built, taking off, and crashing immediately? That never happens. Now, how many times do you hear of a website being built, getting launched, and crashing immediately? That happens all the time. So we can ask ourselves, how do the airline industry do? You know, how can they pull those crazy things? Well, there's many parts to the answer, but two of them are, you know, really incredibly thorough QA process. And another one that is pretty interesting for us is heavy reliance on checklists, on process checklists. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. Another example is, you know, the construction business. All right, you just build your dream house and you use a very, you know, good contractor. They're like very serious people. So you move into your house, and first of all, you're going to expect that house to be pretty solid, right? For a storm, you don't want to see your house falling down, or first little sparkle in the kitchen and the house burns down. But also, you know, a year after moving in, you want to move a light fixture, you bring in an electrician and you're like, okay, I would like to move this lamp there. And he's like, well, I can certainly do that, but I don't know who built this house. Honestly, it will take me less time to redo the entire electricity than moving your lamp. Okay? You obviously don't want to hear that. Now, again, going back to our business, how many times have you heard a developer telling you, well, we can add this feature, but honestly, it will take me less time to rebuild the entire app than building this new feature? You see where I'm getting with. Okay, and again, we can ask ourselves, okay, how do the construction business go around with it, and how do they manage to fix those problems? Again, many potential answers, but one of them is, you know, construction code, like standards, like having the entire industry working with some standards. So what is the software industry doing about it? Obviously, I'm not the first one thinking about that. Many people made lots of papers, books, etc. about it. And one of the answers that seems to be the common denominator in the industry is Agile practices. And people in 2000, early 2000s, gathered in Osceola, Utah. They came up with this thing called the Agile MANIFESTO. I don't know if you're familiar with it. This is not necessarily the point of this talk, so I'm going to go very quickly through it. But it's built around 4 foundational values, 12 supporting principles. All of them are available at this address, agilemanifesto.org. And if we scan very quickly through them, individual interaction over processes. It's all about the humans. We always need to remember when you're building software that, you know, it's built by humans for humans. So the human is at the center of the entire process. Working software over comprehensive documentation, working software. That's like obvious, but sometimes a little forgotten. Customer collaboration, that's maybe the less relevant for this talk. And responding to change over following a plan. That's another very important one. You know, I don't know about you, but I've never worked on any project that, you know, we receive specs and the day we launch, it's exactly the specs we received. There's always change. So instead of dreading change, instead of, you know, fighting against it, we're going to embrace it, we're going to accept it, and we're going to make it part of the entire process. And so 12 principles, I'm not going to go through the 12, but I'm going to focus on the 5 that are like the most relevant for this talk. Welcome changing requirements. We just talked about it. Deliver working software frequently. So again, emphasis on the working software, but frequently is the important part here. You probably heard that acronym of MVP, most valuable product, etc. So it's focusing on your core ideas, on the core features before anything else. When you start a new app, when someone comes to you with an idea for a website, you'll have this like crazy long list of features, of things, of super cool things this website or this app is going to do. But what you really need to ask yourself, if you want to become really truly agile, is what are the core features? Focus on those, build them, launch, and then add to it. Build some new features. Extend your app. Working software is the primary measure of progress. Again, they seem to really insist on that working software part. That's interesting. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhance agility. So if we pay attention to technical excellence and good design, we're going to become more agile. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And finally, simplicity is the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on too. So Agile is great, and again, I think a large amount of the industry is agreeing that it's the way to build software nowadays. Some shops are doing it really well, some others not so much, but that's okay. But if we go like further than just Agile and try to consider some other things. Money is obviously very important for everybody. So this Austrian firm, and if you have downloaded the slides, all those are links you can click and get to the source material, came up with that number saying that in 2016, software failure cost the global economy $1.1 trillion US. I don't know how they came up with that number exactly. I don't know how accurate it is, but the point is it's costing us a lot of money. And that's pretty obvious. You know, we're relying more and more on technology. When technology fails, businesses are losing money. That's just logic. IBM published a paper again in the early 2000s saying that the cost of discovering defects after release are significant, up to 30 times more than if you catch them during the design and architectural phase. Again, there's a lot of debate about this number and how they came up with it, and the fact that it's like almost 15 years old paper. So is it still accurate, etc. But again, when you think about it, even if it's not 30, even if it's a different number, whenever you have a bug into production, your customer is wasting time. Then they maybe send a ticket to support. Support, treat the ticket, reach out, send it to the engineering team, etc., etc. And all those steps, all this time and money that is spent. It's obviously taking you a lot more time and then costing your business a lot more money than if you're catching up this, if your engineer is finding the bug himself during the design process. And finally, there's the more philosophical one, the karma and happiness factor. As a developer, when I ship a beautiful piece of code, when, I put it on GitHub, that makes me really happy. That makes me, happy to be doing what I'm doing. And, code is poetry. That's one of WordPress tagline. And some people laugh about it because WordPress might not be necessarily the most, known for the beauty of its core code. But in any case, there's a certain pride into writing beautiful software. And on the other hand of the spectrum, there's nothing worse when you come in the morning to work, you open your emails and you've got a support ticket from a customer saying, I hate your website, it's broken, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't make me feel really good about myself, you know, and I don't necessarily like spending my evenings at work because something is broken or, you know, that's not good. So yeah, that's another consideration. All right, now let's talk about what is good code, defining a goal. So before we define it, I would like to talk about dependencies, about, you know, there's some requirements for good code. The first one is communication. Good code doesn't happen by magic. It's going to require you to talk and talk and talk, you know. Your team is going to have to spend some time discussing all of this and talk. And remember again that it's all about the human and talk about it. Experience. Not saying that an experienced developer will necessarily write good code, but if you're trying to follow the practices that we're going to discuss later, experience will certainly help. And finally, be reasonable. When you work in a team, you have to make some choice and you have to make some compromises. And you've got to always remember that there will be some times where you will have to do things you don't like. But as long as it's benefiting the team, as long as it's benefiting the code, as long as it's benefiting your product and your business, then it's a good thing. And then you should do it. And also, we're going to set up processes. We're going to set up workflows. We're going to set up rules. But there's always going to be that one edge case scenario where you can't follow those rules. And that's okay. It's okay to make an exception. And you should never, you know, act like staying like totally focused on your workflow or rules because, you know, it's a rule. So always act with reason. All right, Robert C. Martin in his book Clean Code, I think he borrowed this diagram from a blog author, Tom Owelda, I'm sorry, I'm butchering his name probably, defines code quality measurements is, you know, calculated in what the fudge per minute. I thought it's a pretty good representation, and I would like to point out your attention on the fact that even good code still have a couple of what the fudge per minute, and it's important. All right, what is good code then? If you take from the Agile Manifesto and many of the articles I read preparing this talk, CTOs defining what good code is, I think we can kind of regroup it into four major categories. First one, code that works. Okay, remember, working code. Code that is easy to understand, code that is easy to maintain, and code that ships fast. Now, for those four categories, what I would like to do is giving you some ideas of how you can achieve that, how you can do that. Code that works. Self-testing. That's probably a very obvious one, but it's pretty crazy how many times you see developers shipping code that they haven't really tested correctly. Or we've all been lazy. You know, you do something, it works, then you're like, oh, I forgot this. I just need to add those 2 lines of code. You add them, and you don't test again, and you ship. It happened to everybody, and obviously, in those 2 lines of code you added, there's a bug, there's a problem. You forgot a comma or something, and you're shipping it back to production. Anyway, in any case, you should have a local development environment. If you're working with WordPress, you're likely using something like VVV or Docker, plenty of solution. The key point here is having something that is easy to use and easy to spin up, because the harder you're going to make your life, you know, the less likely you're going to be self-testing. So you need something easy to spin up and that is always like kind of ready for you to be able to test your code. Second, automated testing. There's a lot of debate about automated testing. So again, in the WordPress world, we're going to be talking about unit tests and with PHP unit, front-end testing with Selenium. There was a great talk last year. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but about testing with Selenium. I highly recommend. Anyway, a lot of people are going to tell you, you know, automated testing is great. Every single line of code you're writing should be tested. Some other people are going to be telling you testing is a waste of time. You should do user testing, automated testing, like will fail half of the time. It's a waste of time. I think like many things in the world, it's also a matter of, the middle ground, finding some good, like a good middle ground. I think the critical component of your app, the ones that really your business is depending on, those you should have some automated testing. You should have some regression testing implemented. The other stuff, the more eye candy, the more, less critical business. If you want to shave off some time and be a little lazy, maybe you can afford it. That's up to you. But a minimum of automated testing is usually a really good idea. And finally, code reviews. So code reviews, we started at the School of Public Health in my team a year ago. We started using code reviews. So now, not a single line of code is shipping to production without doing a code review, without your code being reviewed by a peer. And for us, it's been like really, really great. First of all, we use code reviews as our user testing phase. So part of the code review process is having the person actually pull the branch locally and actually test the feature, making sure it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. So that has forced on us a second, level of testing. Another benefit of code reviews, when I know that someone is actually going to look at my code and reading it, all of a sudden, really, I'm paying a little bit more attention to what I'm doing, and I'm trying to write it in a slightly better way because, I don't want my colleagues to judge me. Another benefit of code reviews, it's helping us having some good architectural discussions a lot earlier in the process. Why did you do something like that? Should we do it like this because we have this coming next, et cetera, et cetera. This has been like a really, really great benefit. And finally, the last one, if you're anything like our team, we're a pretty small team, 3 full-time developers. We usually work on our own projects. Everyone has his own little projects, and Bob is creating his app in his corner, and whenever Bob is on vacation and Bob's app breaks, my manager comes to me and I'm like, that's Bob's app, I don't know. And code reviews have slightly, or significantly, should I say, diminished that discussion, because now I have to review Bob's app. I have to review his code. So I'm aware of what he's doing. I'm aware of how his app is working. So there's a sense of ownership of the code base that has like completely shifted. And that is like really, really great when you're working in an environment like ours. Anyway, code reviews are a very fascinating topic. We could talk about it. That could be an entire talk. So I'm going to skip ahead, but you should, if you're not doing code reviews at all, I would definitely tell you to consider them. Okay, code that is easy to understand. One, I don't remember who, but I read this paper, and one argument that the author was making is, your code base should always look like one person wrote it, and you should not be able to tell who wrote it. And I think this is kind of what you should be targeting. One way to achieve that is using code standards and conventions. Developers spend way too much time arguing about spaces, tabs, parentheses alignment, and snake case versus camel case, or all that stuff. When you work on a large project like WordPress, you're lucky. You don't have to have those conversations. Someone already had them for you and came up with an answer. And in the case of WordPress, we have this great tool called WordPress Coding Standards. It's actually not a tool. The tool is PHP Code Sniffer, and the WPCS are a set of rules for that tool. That's going to take your code base, scan it, and tell you all the mistakes, all the things you're doing wrong. If you do it on an old project, you don't want to do it because you're going to hate the amount of errors it's going to give you, etc. What we did in the case of our team, we agreed that any old code would not be compliant. However, any new code that we're writing would now be following 100% all the WordPress coding standard rules. Again, be reasonable. Sometimes you need to make some exceptions. And you know what? The tool actually gives you some great way to create those exceptions. But 99.9% of the time, we're going to be following those standards. And if you really, really don't like the WordPress coding standards, that's fine. There's plenty of other coding standards available out there. Google has some for JavaScript, for CS, for all you want. They're there. The point is, pick one and follow it. And that's going to help you having this code base that looks like one person wrote it. Another important thing when you think about making your code easy to understand is naming. I'm talking about function naming, variable naming, class naming. Like, comments are great, but you should never really need to write a comment to explain what a function is doing. The function name itself should be like pretty obvious. And the parameters this function is taking should also be pretty obvious as to what they're containing, what they're doing, etc. Okay? I'm not saying don't write comments. Of course not. There's always, there's always going to be a time where you need to be smart, where you need to do something complex. And those, you should always write comments for those cases. But you should always try to, if you need to write a comment to explain what you're doing, ask yourself, is there maybe an easier way to understand what I'm doing, just by changing the way I wrote the code instead of needing to write a comment. Readability over optimization / smart, that kind of goes to what I was saying before. Always favor readability. How many times do you hear like, yeah, but that's not optimized, blah, blah, blah. Honestly, who cares about that 0.111 millisecond of execution time if then when I'm going to need to go into your code and change it, I'm going to spend 20 hours trying to understand what you did and fix it and refactor it. That's going to cost a lot more to my business than that 0.111 millisecond of execution time. Not saying that optimization is not important, obviously not. But again, readability should always be the main priority when you write code. Code that is easy to maintain. Architecture. That's another very important point. Too many times, and that's one of those where experience is going to help a lot. Too many times I see people, they receive specs, they receive a story in Jira, and immediately start coding. Don't do that. Take a minute, take 2 minutes, take 15 minutes, a walk, paper, whiteboard, whatever you need. Think about what you're about to do. Think about the general architecture. Think about how your class is going to be built. Don't start writing code immediately. Just a few seconds. And build for the present, design for the future. Again, we need to remember that we're in an agile world and we're building agile software, and that code is going to change. Whether you like it or not, it's going to change. You might not know it yet. You might know it because your customer doesn't seem to see the big picture, and you know very well that once this code is shipping, they're gonna come back to you and say, well, actually, you like this to do this differently because we don't like what we asked you originally. Anyway, WordPress has some great features to do that, and one of my favorite thing about WordPress is action and filter hooks. How you can change anything, or most of the things of the core behaviors, like how you can completely customize the way WordPress works. That's awesome. And not often enough do I see developers on smaller projects, using those mechanisms, building them in. And obviously, we said before, we want to maximize the amount of work not done. We don't want to, write useless code. We don't want to clutter our app. But still, sometimes a well-placed filter, a well-placed action hook, that's going to potentially save us a lot of time on the long term. Again, that's one point where experience is going to help you. That's where, down the line, you're going to start seeing, okay, here I have some raw data. I'm doing some filtering on it. Maybe I should build in a hook So whenever they ask us to add a new way of filtering that data, I can go back and very easily change that behavior. Anyway. And finally, code that ships fast. One of the first steps to do is to use some kind of agile project management. There's plenty of them. Again, that could be an entire talk. Scrum is one of them. In our case, at the School of Public Health, we're using Kanban. The biggest reason is our team is very heterogeneous. We have, DB administrators, some support people, etc. We're not all developers, and Scrum is very developer-oriented, works very well in mostly an agency setup where you have those projects that you take in, etc. For us, we're jumping context all the time, etc. And Kanban seems to be offering us a lot more agility in that manner. Anyway, Kanban might not be the best solution for your team and the way you work. That I don't have the magical answer to it. You'll have to do some research. You'll have to do some testing on your end and figure out which one works best for you. But you should be trying to embrace some kind of agile project management methodology. And that's going to help you, breaking down your work in smaller chunks. That's going to help you avoid working on too many things at the same time. And that's going to help you on the long term shipping on, on the due date, not breaking deadlines. Automation. Going back to my automated testing example, that's something where you hear a lot of people saying, you should be automating everything. And some people saying, well, but you're wasting so much time configuring those automation tools that at the end of the day, you're not saving any time, blah, blah, blah. And when the automation tool breaks, but again, middle ground, identify the really painful processes, the really painful part of your workflow that where you feel like this is boring, I'm wasting so much time doing this, and automate those stuff. And the rest, if you need to do a few things manually, that's fine. Be lazy, reuse, fork, extend. Minimizing the amount of work not done. We're lucky, we're working with WordPress, open source, millions of plugins, millions of themes. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's probably already someone who, build whatever you're trying to do. And even if you find a plugin, it seems to be doing whatever you need, it's actually not. There might be some part of the app that you can reuse. Or if nothing else, it's going to give you, some ideas on the architecture, on things you should not be doing, etc. So always try to see what's out there before you start coding, before you start creating anything. But also, if we go back to the few last points, if you started building your code with some hooks, if you start, building some code that you can read and go back to 6 months later and still understand, you're going to be able to reuse your own code much more easily. And therefore, you're going to save a lot of time and ship faster. And finally, I was talking about it with the airline industry, checklists. Checklists is something we're starting to implement, and that I think is really underrated. Speed is the enemy of quality, or whatever you want to put it. As you start shipping code faster, as you start, trying to do more things, you make mistakes, and that's fine. And one of the reasons you're playing, works most of the time, pilots do very little things by habit. They have those crazy detailed checklists, and they follow them one by one, and all the steps like, I've done this, I've done that, etc., etc. Critical part of your process, the one that you can't automate, that you've decided it's better that we do it manually, you should have a checklist for that process. Because we've all, launched that website at 3 in the morning, and on Friday, and you come back on Monday, and your marketing team is screaming at you, "Whoa, we're out of Google. Oh yeah, I forgot to uncheck that. Do not index the website on Google." Right? Those checklists. That will definitely help you with this kind of issues. All right. There's obviously a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of ground to cover, and I could not talk about everything. So if you're interested in going further, I would like to recommend a couple good reads. I mentioned very early Clean Code by Robert C. Martin. That's like the Bible when talking about code quality. Has some really good insights and a lot of things about naming, architecture, and all of this. Strongly recommend. Agile product management with Kanban. If you ever consider Kanban as your project management solution, this is a really good book. Eric Breshner, he is the head of the development team at Xbox for Microsoft. And basically, in this book, he explained how they went from zero Agile to full Kanban with his team, and all the steps and the hurdles and the problems and etc. Really good book. And on top of it, if you don't read books, there's plenty of good YouTube videos about from him and interviews, etc. A little bit of Harvard self-promotion, the checklist manifesto at Tulga one day. He's one of our rockstar faculty. He wrote this awesome book about checklists. This is not about software at all. This is about mostly how they implemented checklists in the medical industry, in the operating room. But he is using a lot of analogies from the building industry, from the airline industry, etc., and how checklists have changed, the way he is doing some things and how they implemented this in the operating room. Really good book, highly recommend. And finally, a really good article that I like about code reviews from the Stack Engineering team. How about code reviews? There's plenty of resources about code reviews, but I thought it was one good article that is kind of summarizing all the drawbacks and advantages of doing code reviews, and that was one that talked the most to me. Okay, I'm sorry if I was talking too fast. But yeah, at this point, I would like to welcome any questions.
So you mentioned checklists, and you said you're starting to use those more with your team. Can you give an example of a checklist or a couple of or ways that you built checklists? What was the first checklist that you kind of formalized with your team?
So we're still formalizing those checklists, but the first two that we're focusing on are launching websites and creating websites, like the original first few steps when we create a website. We work with many offices, and part of that work is, creating that website on our staging environment, making sure it's not accessible to the public, activating a few plugins and things like that. And we always miss one of those steps at some point. So we're trying to document that process of creating like a new website when we receive a request from a user, and the launching part, because the Google index example, or we have a plugin that will block public traffic and require you to sign in with the single sign-on solution from the university. And we usually use this during the beta, where we want everyone from the department to be able to see the website without exposing the website to the public. Don't forget to do that. Don't forget to ask the custom domain to be added to our SSO system and things like that. So yeah, launching and creating new websites, that's the two first that we want to focus on. But I envision many more in the future, because we have a lot of process.
Can I ask you a question about automated, or not even automated testing, but just testing in general? You mentioned Selenium as your guys' testing product of choice, and not being a fully trained engineer, I have no idea how to even get started in that space or what that entails. Can you talk a little bit about how to get started doing those kind of unit tests and those kind of things?
So to be very honest, we don't use Selenium, and we do very low automated testing right now.
Totally fair.
We're coming from far, and we've been improving a lot in the last few years, and well, limited time, we got to pick our battles. But if you're interested in looking into Selenium, again, I can only like refer you to
the guy up there.
this presentation from last year was great. It was exactly like how to get started with Selenium, and that, you know, and how, and that's going to help you see like, okay, this critical part of my app, whenever I push an update, suddenly the menu is not showing up anymore. And that's, those automated testing are going to, help you tackle those.
Cool.
And Unitest, there's plenty of really good talks. A lot of automatic people have done some really good talks at different WordCamps about PHP Unit. So again,
I'll keep looking. Thanks. No, you're fine.
Any other questions?
Okay, hearing none from the room. Let's give Guillaume a big hand. Thank you very much.